A dark, freezing bunker somewhere on the Eastern Front. Winter 1943. Frozen mud, shattered equipment, bloodstains in the snow. Inside a bombed-out shelter, a young German soldier, barely 19 years old, sits slumped against a frozen concrete wall. His uniform is torn and caked with mud, ice, and dried blood. His breath comes in short, ragged gasps, each one visible in the Arctic air. His hands tremble uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from shock, exhaustion, and fear. In his shaking hand, he clutches a small, crumpled photograph. A smiling family back in Bavaria. Mother, father, a younger sister. They're standing in front of their home, dressed in their Sunday best, frozen in a moment of happiness that feels like it happened a lifetime ago. Outside, the sounds of war rage on. Artillery shells explode in the distance. The staccato rhythm of machine gun fire, screams some in German, some in Russian, echoing through the frozen wasteland. But inside this bunker, there's only silence, and the slow, inevitable approach of death. This soldier isn't a monster. He's not a fanatical Nazi. He's not a war criminal. He's just a boy, a teenager who was conscripted, given a rifle, and told to fight for the fatherland. He doesn't want to be here. He wants to go home. He wants to see his family again. He wants to survive. But in 48 hours, he'll be dead, frozen, forgotten, one of millions. This is the story they don't tell you about World War II, not the story you learned in school, not the sanitized Hollywood version with clear heroes and villains, heroic generals and glorious victories. This is the story of human beings, soldiers and civilians alike caught in the meat grinder of the Eastern Front, the most brutal, merciless, and deadly theater of war in all of human history, where approximately 30 million people died, where soldiers didn't just get killed in battle, they froze to death in their sleep. They starved in POW camps. They were worked to death, tortured, executed, and forgotten, where leadership failures cost millions of lives, where war crimes became routine, where the line between victim and perpetrator, between hero and criminal, blurred into nothing. And here's the question that will haunt you long after this video ends. Were these soldiers heroes, victims, war criminals, or just ordinary people, sons, brothers, fathers, forced into an extraordinary hell not of their making? The answer isn't as simple as you think. If you think you know about World War II, you're probably wrong. Most people's knowledge of World War II comes from American and Western European perspectives. The Battle of Britain, the liberation of Paris. These are important stories, yes, but they're not the whole story, not even close. The real war, the war that truly decided the outcome of World War II, happened in the East, between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Across the frozen steppes of Russia, the blood-soaked fields of Ukraine, the shattered ruins of Stalingrad, the forests of Belarus. This was war on a scale almost impossible for the modern mind to comprehend. Operation Barbarossa, the 22nd of June 1941. On a summer morning in 1941, Adolf Hitler launched the largest military invasion in human history. 3.8 million German soldiers, supported by nearly 4,000 tanks and 4,000 aircraft, invaded the Soviet Union along an 1,800-mile front, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Hitler told his generals it would be over in weeks. "We have only to kick in the door," he said, "and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." He was catastrophically, fatally wrong. The brutal reality, here's what the history books don't tell you. The Eastern Front wasn't just brutal, it was apocalyptic. German soldiers advanced hundreds of miles into Soviet territory during the summer and fall of 1941. They captured millions of prisoners. They destroyed thousands of Soviet tanks and aircraft. Victory seemed within reach. And then winter came. Winter 1941 to 1942. Nature joins the war. The Russian winter is not like winter in Western Europe or North America. It's a killing force of nature. Temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit and lower. Equipment failed. Vehicles wouldn't start, weapons jammed. Soldiers who had been issued summer uniforms froze to death in their foxholes. Frostbite claimed more victims than Soviet bullets. Men lost fingers, toes, entire limbs to the cold. Some simply sat down in the snow and never got up again. One German soldier wrote in his diary, "We are no longer fighting three enemies, the Russians, the cold, and the incompetence of our own command. We are fighting for our very survival." Another wrote, "I have seen things no human being should ever see. I have done things I can never forgive myself for. And I know with absolute certainty that I am going to die here, thousands of miles from home." Stalingrad, the city that became hell on earth. If there was one battle that symbolized the horror of the Eastern Front, it was Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted 5 months from August 1942 to February 1943. Nearly 2 million people died, soldiers, civilians, children, all caught in a battle neither side could afford to lose. Stop and think about that number for a moment. 2 million human beings, each with a name, a family, dreams, fears, hopes, killed in one city, in just 5 months. The fighting was house to house, room to room, hand to hand. Soldiers used rifles, machine guns, grenades, bayonets, shovels, knives, bare hands, whatever it took to kill the enemy. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier arriving in Stalingrad was 24 hours. German forces controlled 90% of the city at one point. But the Soviets refused to surrender. They held on to tiny pockets of resistance, fighting from the rubble, launching counterattacks, dying by the thousands. A German officer wrote, "Stalingrad is no longer a town. By day, it is an enormous cloud of burning, blinding smoke. It is a vast furnace lit by the reflection of the flames. And when night arrives, one of those scorching, howling, bleeding nights, the dogs plunge into the Volga and swim desperately to gain the other bank. Animals flee this hell. The hardest stones cannot bear it for long. Only men endure." When the battle finally ended in February 1943, 91,000 German soldiers surrendered. They were starving, frozen, broken men. Of those 91,000, only 6,000 ever made it home. The rest died in Soviet POW camps over the next decade. If you were a soldier on the Eastern Front, German or Soviet, you faced a terrible choice. Fight to the death, or surrender and face something that might be even worse than death. Soviet treatment of German POWs. Between 1941 and 1945, Soviet forces captured approximately 3 million German soldiers. Only 1.5 million survived. That's a 50% mortality rate. 1 out of every 2 German POWs died in Soviet captivity. How did they die? German POWs were force-marched hundreds of miles in sub-zero temperatures with no food, water, or shelter. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were shot where they fell or simply left to freeze. In the camps, conditions were beyond inhumane. Prisoners were housed in unheated barracks or sometimes just fenced-off areas with no shelter at all. They slept on frozen ground. Diseases spread like wildfire: typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis, gangrene. Food was a starvation ration, often nothing more than watery soup made from rotten vegetables and a small piece of black bread. Medical care was non-existent. Prisoners were worked to death in mines, forests, construction sites, building roads and railways across Siberia. If you couldn't work, you didn't eat. If you didn't eat, you died. One survivor recalled, "Every morning, we woke up and counted the dead. Some mornings, there were 20 bodies. Some mornings, there were 50. We stopped learning their names. There was no point." German treatment of Soviet POWs. But if you think the Germans were any better, you're wrong. In fact, they were worse. Of the 5.7 million Soviet soldiers captured by Germany, approximately 3.3 million died in captivity. That's a 57% mortality rate. Why was German treatment of Soviet POWs so brutal? Because Nazi ideology classified Slavic peoples, including Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians as untermenschen, subhuman. Soviet POWs were considered expendable. They weren't protected by the Geneva Convention, which the Soviets hadn't signed. They weren't even considered fully human. Many Soviet POWs were shot immediately upon capture. Others were herded into open-air camps with no shelter, no food, no water, no sanitation. They froze. They starved. They died of disease. Survivors ate grass, tree bark, leather belts, anything to stay alive. In some camps, cannibalism was documented. The moral complexity no one wants to discuss. Here's where this story gets uncomfortable. Were these POWs victims? Absolutely, without question. But were some of them also perpetrators of war crimes? Yes. German soldiers on the Eastern Front participated in mass executions of civilians. They burned villages. They rounded up Jews for extermination camps. They followed orders that resulted in the deaths of millions of innocent people. Soviet soldiers, when they advanced into Germany in 1944 to 45, committed mass rapes and estimated 2 million German women. They looted. They executed civilians suspected of supporting the Nazis. War doesn't create simple heroes and villains. It creates broken, traumatized people doing terrible things. Wars are fought by soldiers, but they're started and lost by leaders. And on the Eastern Front, catastrophic leadership decisions cost millions of lives. Hitler's fatal mistakes. Adolf Hitler fancied himself a military genius. He studied maps. He read military history. He believed he understood warfare better than his generals. He was wrong, dead wrong, and his arrogance killed millions. Mistake has own. Invading the Soviet Union in the first place, Germany was already at war with Britain. The Battle of the Atlantic was draining resources. The Luftwaffe had failed to win the Battle of Britain. America would soon enter the war. Hitler's generals begged him not to open a second front. They warned him that Germany couldn't win a two-front war. He ignored them. Mistake #2. Diverting forces from Moscow. In August 1941, German forces were on the outskirts of Moscow. The Soviet capital was within reach. Capturing it might have ended the war. Hitler ordered his armies to divert south to capture Ukrainian oil fields and industrial centers instead. By the time German forces returned to Moscow in November, winter had arrived. The offensive failed. Mistake #3. No retreat orders. Hitler forbade his armies from retreating, even when surrounded and facing certain destruction. At Stalingrad, he ordered the Sixth Army to stand fast rather than break out of the Soviet encirclement. He promised air supply. It never came. The Sixth Army fought until it ran out of ammunition, food, and men. Then it surrendered. Stalin's equal brutality. Joseph Stalin was no better. His purges of the Red Army in the 1932 killed or imprisoned thousands of experienced officers, leaving the Soviet military leaderless when war came. His infamous Order No. 227, not one step back, forbade retreat under penalty of death. Soviet soldiers who fled or surrendered were branded traitors. Their families could be punished. NKVD blocking detachments shot their own soldiers if they retreated. Entire units were thrown into suicidal attacks with no support, no plan, just orders to charge and die. The human cost of leadership failure. One veteran said it simply, "The generals made the plans, the politicians made the speeches. We paid the price." How many millions died because of Hitler's megalomania, Stalin's paranoia? The incompetence, arrogance, and cruelty of men who never faced the consequences of their decisions? We'll never know the exact number, but we know it was too many. War brings out the worst in humanity. It strips away civilization. It reveals what people are capable of when all restraints are removed. On the Eastern Front, atrocities weren't exceptions. They were the rule. The Holocaust in the East. When German forces advanced into Soviet territory, special killing squads called Einsatzgruppen followed behind the front lines. Their mission: exterminate Jews, communists, Roma, and anyone the Nazis deemed undesirable. Between 1941 and 1945, the Einsatzgruppen murdered approximately 1.5 million people. Most were shot and buried in mass graves. Men, women, children, entire communities erased. At WWII, a ravine near Kiev, 33,771 Jews were murdered in just 2 days. September 29 to 30, 1,941. Civilian massacres by both sides. German forces implemented a policy of collective punishment. If partisans attacked German troops, entire villages were burned. Civilians were executed. Thousands died. Soviet forces, advancing into Germany in 1945, committed mass rapes. An estimated 2 million German women were raped by Soviet soldiers. Many were killed afterward. Both sides looted. Both sides executed prisoners. Both sides targeted civilians. The Siege of Leningrad. From September 1941 to January 1944, 2 days, German forces besieged Leningrad. The city was completely cut off. No food, no fuel, no supplies. Over those 872 days, approximately 1.5 million civilians died, mostly from starvation. People ate wallpaper paste. They ate sawdust. They ate pets, cats, dogs, rats. They ate the dead. Cannibalism was documented. Parents watched their children starve. Children watched their parents die. Who was guilty? Who faced justice? After the war, Nazi leaders were prosecuted at Nuremberg. Many were executed. Justice, it seemed, was served. But what about Soviet war crimes? They were ignored, covered up, forgotten. Why? Because the Soviets were on the winning side. This raises an uncomfortable question that historians still debate. Is justice only for the losers? Physical wounds heal. Psychological wounds don't. PTSD before we had a name for it. During World War II, they didn't call it PTSD. They called it shell shock, combat fatigue, war neurosis. But the symptoms were identical. Nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, depression, survivor's guilt, uncontrollable rage. Soldiers who broke down psychologically were often labelled cowards or malingerers. Some were court-martialed. Others were sent back to the front. There was no therapy, no counselling, no understanding. The long shadow of war. Millions of World War II veterans carried psychological trauma for the rest of their lives. They couldn't talk about what they'd seen, what they'd done, who they'd killed. Many turned to alcohol to numb the pain. Many suffered in silence, unable to connect with family or friends. Many never recovered. One veteran said decades after the war, "The war ended in 1945, but for me, it never ended. I'm still there, in that bunker, watching my friends die." World War II killed approximately 70 to 85 million people. The Eastern Front accounted for nearly half of that death toll. But here's what we need to understand. These weren't just numbers in a history book. They were people. Young men who wanted to go home. Civilians who wanted to survive. Families torn apart. Dreams destroyed. Futures erased. So here are the questions we must ask. Was it worth it? Did the soldiers who died believe in what they were fighting for? Or were they just following orders? Did the leaders who sent them to their deaths care about their lives? Or were they just pawns in a geopolitical game? And here's the harder question. Could it happen again? We like to think we've learned from history. We like to believe humanity has evolved. But have we? Are we still willing to send young people to die for leaders who won't face the consequences? Are we still willing to dehumanize our enemies? Are we still willing to look away when atrocities happen? Tell us in the comments. Do you think the soldiers on the Eastern Front were heroes, victims, or something else? Should Soviet war crimes have been prosecuted the same way Nazi war crimes were? How do we honor the memory of those who died without glorifying war? What lessons from World War II have we forgotten or never learned? Because if we don't remember, if we don't learn, history will repeat itself. And next time, It might be us in that frozen bunker, clutching a photograph of home, waiting